Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to start our weekly anxiety teaching. I'm live on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're watching live, great. Thanks for joining. And if you're watching on replay, welcome and glad you're here. So, like always, we're going to take a moment to simply settle and just give yourself some time to come back to this moment, come back to yourself. Usually, a lot of times with anxiety, we're two or three steps ahead, if not 10, or we're two or three steps back, if not 10. So, we're going to just come back to this moment. So, I'm going to invite you to take a moment or two of silence. And as you're taking this moment, just see if you can sense and notice what's in the room. Feel your arms and your legs. Sometimes our minds get real tight after a few hours of being in the day. So notice if there's some tension that you're holding in the mind itself and that your shoulders, maybe your belly has some tension. And just gently invite all of that to relax and to settle. And as best you can, notice the quality of your breath as you breathe in and out. And I invite you to just consider that there's nothing to fix right now in this moment. We're just being here. You're taking this time for yourself. And just let the deep acceptance of this moment arise and meet you where you are. So, today's teaching, we're going to do a little bit more exploration around the inner critic and this concept of open awareness and combining these two techniques. For those of you who have done a lot of work with me, clearly the inner critic is a big part of our anxiety. And a lot of us live with this internal voice in our heads that's just constantly grading us. It's telling us that we didn't do good enough, that we should have said something better, that we should have looked better, we should have worked harder. And that voice is what we call the inner critic. And one of the things that I teach with my clients is that it's not just self talk, it's really a deep internalized structure that's often formed in childhood. And it tries to keep us safe by controlling how we show up. A lot of times, the inner critic is a smoke detector that's been set off by steam from a shower, right? It's very loud, it's very alarming, it's trying to be helpful, but it's generally reacting to a non-threat. So obviously that creates a lot of anxiety and fuels our anxiety because it adds pressure to whatever it is that we're doing in any given moment. So even when we're succeeding, it's whispering, okay, but is that enough? What about next time? And because it's impossible for us to really know what anybody else is thinking, we project the inner critic on other people. We think that they're judging us when they're probably not. And it's a miserable experience if you've been through that and if you have a fairly active inner critic. So it's not just because you're stressed that you're experiencing anxiety. Generally, you're anxious because you're under this constant internal surveillance this voice that's going to jump on you with anything that you're doing. So the issue here is generally the inner critic pretends, and here's the key word here is pretends to be your conscience. It thinks it's your conscience, and you believe that to be true, but it's actually not. It's not any kind of real wisdom coming from your true essential self, and it's not actually true conscience. And in other words, it's more of a survival defense technique that you developed in order to stay safe, and that becomes what you think is conscious. So, what do we do with this? There's lots of different ways to approach the inner critic, and that's what we work on in the anxiety breakthrough curriculum. We have a whole stage looking at all the different aspects of the inner critic and how to deal with them. But one of the most foundational techniques that I want to introduce to whoever's watching right now, but also as a recap for people that I've worked with, is this technique of open awareness and actually just being able to observe your thoughts. So think of open awareness like the space of consciousness or awareness itself. So the analogy that I like to use is this is like the awareness of the of being the sky that holds the weather, right? Holds the clouds, whether or not there's sun, whether or not there's rain. So in this analogy, you're the sky, your awareness is the sky, and your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations are like the stuff that's happening in the sky, clouds, the rain, storms, whatever it is. So, the key thing about this is that when we rest in open awareness, we are not trying to fight the inner critic at all. We're not trying to argue with it. We're just simply watching it. And when you're able to watch the inner critic and what it's saying, it makes it a little more objective. Your orientation, your perspective, the experience of it is almost like you're watching a toddler just going crazy and really doubling down that everything is in danger and you're not safe and we need to do this thing, when in actuality, there's nothing that really needs to be done at all. Another way to think about this is imagining yourself sitting on a riverbank and you're watching the water and there's leaves that fall in the water and then the current takes it down past you. And so you can imagine yourself on this riverbank watching your thoughts float by like the leaves. And the inner critic is just one leaf. And the mistake that a lot of us make, especially if you've struggled with anxiety for a long time, is that we totally think that this leaf is so interesting and it's going to keep us safe and it's going to do all of these different things for us. And so we jump into it and start wrestling with it or trying to grab it or do whatever it is. But what we are practicing with open awareness is just staying on the riverbank, staying where it's dry and not jumping into the river. So the inner critic tends to be fused with our identity, right? So it says, I am bad, or I am not good enough. I am anxious and worried. And the big shift that we're making here is simply saying, there is fear in my experience right now. There is anger in my experience, or there is worry in my experience. So we're not actually identifying with the thoughts, and just see if you can feel into the experience of that. When we're completely consumed by an anxious thought, we're totally in it. And actually, the experience of it is that we become the anxiety itself. So, what we do with open awareness is simply take a step back and say, I'm actually not the anxiety, but I'm experiencing the sensations of anxiety. So, that gives us just a little more space between the thoughts that are happening and actually who you are. So that's really the case of mistaken identity. And a lot of times when we're struggling with anxiety, we go, there's all of these thoughts that are happening. First, if you're not aware of those thoughts happening, then that's the first step. We need to actually be aware of what kinds of thoughts are going on in our minds. Most of us aren't when we first start this kind of work. When you start to become aware of that, we make this shift of, okay, I don't have to buy into what these thoughts and the inner critic is saying. I'm just going to witness it. And that shift is subtle, but it's also really powerful. All right. So, what we're going to practice in a little bit here is noticing one, what the inner critic tends to say to you. So you can just bring up an experience or a memory of some probably fairly recent if you're struggling with anxiety, when the inner critic has been active. And just see what it is saying and what it might be trying to protect you from. So I just got off a call with another client, and it was really interesting because the inner critic would come in and say, "You need to know all of these things are going to happen ahead of time. Because if you don't know what's going to happen, then something bad is going to happen. So you need to control all of these different aspects about what's going to happen in the future." And this could be for what you interpret as a big thing, or it could just be like you're making a call and you don't know what the person on the other end is going to say. And the inner critic, in its noble gesture of trying to protect you, tries to anticipate all of these things. It goes, okay, if this person says this, here's what you say. I need to know exactly how this is going to go. So just feel into the anxiety and all of that, the stress and the exhaustion that you get from actually letting the inner critic run the show there. And so we're working on making this shift of, can you shift from the orientation of the inner critic, which is trying to keep you safe? Yes. But it's doing so by trying to control everything, by trying to control how you show up, by trying to control external circumstances. And underlying that is really a deep belief that things aren't going to be okay. So when we shift from that to actually this orientation that is more like the observer, more like the witness, that's able to see the inner critic, able to observe the thoughts with a certain degree of detachment, then we experience more freedom and more inner space. And actually, that inner space is more of who you are. And in that space, there's actually not a lot of anxiety when we're more identified with being more free, more spacious, less worried, more in touch with the basic goodness or trust that things are going to be just fine. So when we're in that place of things are going to be just fine, you can say whatever it is that you're going to say. The other person can say whatever it is that's going to say, whatever's happening in the future. There's a deep sense of okayness and trust that whatever unfolds is going to be fine. So that's where we want to head toward. So think of, as we get into this practice, we want to, in a way, just get in touch with what the inner critic is saying, and we'll practice this open awareness for a few minutes just so that you get a taste of it. All right. So, what I invite you to do here is just let your eyes soften a bit. If you want, you can close your eyes. And if not, just a soft downward gaze at your desk is completely fine. And just let everything soften. And typically, you will, if you think of an experience or a memory of feeling anxious or feeling bad about yourself, almost always there will be some inner critic involved there. So just see if you can identify whatever the inner critic was saying to you. And this might come across a little subtle. So just open to the possibility and open to the experience of feeling sucked into what the inner critic is saying. This is like really believing it, having it really impact you, being less aware that it's a thought that's happening in your mind and you really becoming the experience itself. And what I'm going to invite you to do here is just take a step out of your experience. So it's almost as if you're taking a step back from the inner critic, from your mind, from the experience itself, from the sensations that are happening, and simply observe what's happening. So observing the thought, observing whatever sensations might be there. And we're going to treat whatever is in your experience there almost just as clouds in the sky, leaves in the river floating by, and simply observe the thoughts or the experience with a kind of detachment. All of it's okay. They're just thoughts. Even if they're critical, they're still just thoughts. Even if it feels like there's dire warnings involved, they're still just thoughts. Even if there's discomfort with the emotions or the sensations, they are just emotions and sensations. All of it is temporary. And you might feel a certain kind of stickiness to the thoughts, like they have their own gravity that draws you in. Just notice that. And if you can, practice letting go, taking a step back, and reclaiming this perspective of being the observer of your thoughts and the witness of your thoughts. And just take a few breaths with that. And just notice now what happens from the perspective of the observer. What is it like to be the observer? How does your experience of yourself change? Is there any shift in the mind itself? And when you're ready, you can come back and open your eyes. So that's a very quick practice. And if you experience the shift, that's how quick it can be. You're just simply shifting from being identified with the thoughts and being completely encapsulated by them to stepping out of them. And from that place of observing and witnessing, there's actually real peace and real okayness in that experience. So a lot of people, they come and they talk to me or they see what I'm doing and they say, how do we do that? That's always the question. How do we do that? And we can make it into this big complicated thing, but really it's just a matter of understanding that we're typically identified with our anxiety, and that if we can shift out of that and have an experience and become really familiar with who we actually are, which is more of this experience of being spacious, of being free, of being the observer and the witness. We actually more are the vehicle or the medium of experience versus all the stuff that's happening in our experience, like our thoughts and our emotions and our sensations. Okay. We are not the voice of this inner critic, even though we might think that we are. You are actually the presence that is watching and able to observe the inner critic and what it's telling you. So we're not trying to kill the inner critic at all. We're not trying to reject it. We're just recognizing that it's scared. Yeah. That it's in a protector role to try to keep you in line, to try to prevent whatever it's perceiving as danger, rejection, humiliation. It could be a sense of not feeling valued or worthy. But the part of you that's watching and able to observe that, this open, spacious awareness, that part of you is more true to who you are and actually doesn't need to prove anything. It's already in touch with the value that the inner critic is seeking, the sense of reassurance and safety that the inner critic is seeking. And one of the things that a lot of my clients experience as they go through this process is being completely identified with the way that the inner critic operates, which tends to be about a lot of control, about a lot of performance, about a lot of evaluating and judging how it is that you're going to show up. And there's a little bit of a transition period because the inner critic is so convinced that it is going to be the thing that keeps you safe. So when you start to surrender this and you start to observe it and you start to detach from it, there is a second stage here that happens where there's quite a bit of uncertainty about whether or not that's actually true, that there's something that's going to catch you or there's something that's going to be there, right? And so this is a sort of in between period that happens where the inner critic can get pretty intense because it's so unsure about what it's going to be like when you surrender and when you let go. There's this period of just not knowing and not feeling like you're going to get supported or anybody's going to come. Sometimes that's an experience of God or the universe or the great being or whatever it is that you want to relate to, not coming in to support you. And that's really a reflection of what happened in our childhood, certain experiences that we might have had even as a young infant, that when we needed something, when we were feeling helpless, when we were feeling unsafe, that nothing came. Environment didn't respond, parents didn't respond, people around us didn't respond or see us in a particular way. And so we developed this conclusion that things inherently aren't safe. And then I have to be the one, right? Inner critic starts to develop and says, you need to show up in a particular way. You need to take care of yourself. You need to go after whatever it is that you need. And if you let go of me, if you let go of the thing that developed, then you're going to get dropped again. You're going to get abandoned again. You're going to feel this kind of helplessness again. Now, that's not true, but we don't know that. The ego doesn't know that yet. The inner critic doesn't know that yet. So that's really helpful to have in those moments community and people who have gone through that process before so that where you have some inkling that it doesn't just end there. That if you let go of the defenses and the strategies and the patterns of the inner critic and your anxiety, that where you land is actually in this place of peace and of trust and of simplicity. And actually, life becomes so much easier then, because if you just think about all the work that the inner critic is telling you that you have to do in order to stay safe, it's really exhausting. From this other place of just being in presence, in okayness, at one-ment, let's say, with God or the universe or whatever sense of that you have, it becomes much more simple, right? So we'll end in a little bit here, and I'm going to open it up to live Q&A for our sanctuary members. So for those of you who don't know about the sanctuary within, this is our school community, and it's a paid membership. You can trial it for 7 days, check it out. We get more teachings like this. You get access to the anxiety breakthrough curriculum. That's really the step-by-step program that I take my clients through. You get access to that and access to more coaching and more guidance. So if you're interested, let me know. I'll drop a link in the comments as well. And I will end then with an optional homework prompt, just so that you get more familiar with the inner critic. Just uh, reflect and ask yourself, what does your particular inner critic believe is at stake? This is a big question because usually we just are aware of the feeling that we have that something bad is going to happen, something that we can't handle somehow. but we're not often aware specifically of what the inner critic is saying is going to happen. Right? So the more that we can be aware of what it's scared of, the more that we can understand the inner critic, the more that we can have compassion on it, the more that we can be present to it. And that's actually more the path of healing the inner critic and allowing it to surrender and let go. So see what it is that what the inner critic is actually feeling scared of. Is it scared of rejection? Is it scared of the feeling of helplessness? Is it feeling scared of not being worthy of humiliation somehow? So each of us has a different kind of flavor to that, but you can see what it is for you. Okay, so I will go ahead and end the live session and open it up to Q&A for our sanctuary members, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.